You are listening to Fate in the Cosmos by Elton Thomas. Part 2, Chapters 6 through 10. Chapter 6, Dweller Analysis. The Watcher drifted in the darkness of space, orbiting Earth in silence. Inside, the Dwellers went about their work with the same efficiency and focus that had governed their lives for centuries. Yet, for Lonni, something had shifted. The questions that had begun to stir within her, questions about the nature of humanity, had grown stronger with each passing day. Lonni found herself drawn to a new line of inquiry, one that was unusual for a Dweller. She had spent weeks studying the lives of humans, Stacy Sims and John Colt, yet she had never questioned her own kind. What if the human condition was not unique to Earth, Lonni thought? What if, buried deep within the logical minds of the Dwellers, there were traces of the same ineffable feelings that drove human behavior? Lonni decided to conduct an analysis, but not of Earth. This time, her subjects would be the crew of the Watcher. The common chamber was quiet, its dim light casting soft reflections off the crystalline walls. Lonni sat at her station, her gaze fixed on the data before her, but her mind was elsewhere. She had prepared a series of questions, simple yet profound. They were designed to probe the very core of what it meant to be a Dweller, to uncover anything that might resemble the human condition. Her first subject was Mira. Mira entered the chamber, her posture straight, her expression calm. Like all Dwellers, Mira's face remained composed, her eyes betraying no emotion as she took her seat across from Lonni. The two locked gazes, their telepathic connection activating instantly. "Mira," Lonni began, her telepathic voice steady. "I'd like to ask you some questions. Questions that might seem unusual." Mira tilted her head slightly, a sign of curiosity. "Unusual how?" "I'm conducting a study, not on humans, but on us. I want to know if there are any traces of the human condition within the Dwellers." A ripple of surprise passed through Mira's mind, though she quickly composed herself. "The human condition? That seems unlikely. But I am willing to participate." Lonni leaned forward slightly, her eyes focused on Mira's. "Have you ever felt the absence of someone you wished were here?" The question lingered in the air between them. Mira's mind flickered with resistance. "We are Dwellers. We don't form attachments in the same way humans do. Our connections are practical, not emotional." "I know," Lonni replied calmly. "But think about it carefully. Is there anyone you've ever thought about? Someone whose absence you felt, even if only briefly?" Mira hesitated, her telepathic voice growing quieter. "There was someone, a colleague. We worked closely together on a project, long ago. After the mission was complete, they were reassigned to a different team. I didn't think much of it at the time, but occasionally I would think about how efficient we were together. There was a sense of loss, though I never gave it much thought. It was fleeting, not the kind of emotional attachment humans experience." Lonni nodded, her mind filing the information away. "Thank you, Mira. One more question. Have you ever experienced something that couldn't be explained in words? Something you couldn't quantify with data or logic?" Mira's posture stiffened slightly. "We are beings of logic, Lonni. Everything can be explained through analysis." "Can it?" Lonni pressed gently. "Think carefully." Mira was silent for a long moment, her eyes flickering as she searched her memories. Finally, she spoke. "Once, during a particularly dangerous mission, our ship encountered an unexpected gravitational anomaly. For a brief moment, I felt something. It wasn't fear, but it was close. A sense that something beyond our control was happening. I couldn't explain it, and I never spoke of it, because the data eventually aligned. But in that moment, I questioned whether we truly understood the universe." Lonni watched Mira carefully, noting the subtle shift in her expression. "Thank you, Mira. You've been helpful." Mira stood, her form as composed as ever, but there was a sense of contemplation in her mind as she left the chamber. Next came Varan. He entered the chamber with his usual efficiency, his thoughts already focused on the task ahead. Varan, more than any other Dweller, was committed to logic and data. Lonni knew he would resist her questions, but she was determined to see what lay beneath his calculated exterior. "Voron," Lonni began, her voice steady. "I want to ask you something outside the realm of our usual work. Have you ever felt the absence of someone you wished were here?" Voron's mind immediately bristled with resistance. We are not humans, Lonni. We don't experience longing." "I'm not asking if you long for someone. I'm asking if you've ever noticed the absence of someone in a way that felt different." Voron paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered the question. "There was a time, many cycles ago, when I worked with a technician who was reassigned. They were highly efficient, and their absence was noted in the productivity of the team. I wouldn't call it longing, but their absence had an impact." Lonni nodded, knowing that was the closest she would get from Voron. "And have you ever encountered something that couldn't be explained by data? An experience or a moment where logic didn't seem sufficient?" Voron hesitated again, his posture stiffening. "We rely on data. If something cannot be explained, it is because we don't yet have the necessary information." "But have you ever felt something that couldn't be explained in the moment? Something that made you question your understanding of the world?" Voron's eyes flickered with a trace of uncertainty, though he quickly suppressed it. "Once. I was working on a complex system integration, and for a moment, everything fell into place. Perfectly. Seamlessly. It was as if the universe aligned. I couldn't explain the feeling. It was more than just satisfaction. It was a moment of clarity that didn't seem to come from logic alone." Lonni leaned back, satisfied with his response. "Thank you, Voron. That's all I needed." Kala was next. She entered the chamber with a lightness that was unusual for a dweller. Kala often found amusement in human behavior, and Lonni wondered if that sense of curiosity would reveal anything deeper. "Kala," Lonni began, her telepathic voice soft. "I'm conducting an analysis on our own kind. Have you ever felt the absence of someone you wished were here?" Kala's eyes widened slightly, a rare physical reaction. That's an unusual question for a dweller. But if I'm honest, yes. There was someone. They were a close colleague during my early cycles. When they left, I noticed their absence, though I wouldn't call it longing. It was more like a missing piece of efficiency. We worked well together, and their absence created a void." Lonni nodded, intrigued. "And have you ever experienced something that couldn't be explained in words or data? Something that defied logic?" Kala hesitated, her mind flickering with memories. "Once, during a deep space mission, I saw something. An anomaly. It wasn't in the data. It was just a flash, a ripple in the fabric of space. I've never been able to explain it. But it made me wonder if there are forces we don't fully understand." Lonni felt a sense of satisfaction as Kala left the chamber. The answers were subtle, but they were there. Finally, Eris entered. The pilot of the Watcher was perhaps the most logical of them all, his mind always focused on the mission. Lonni knew he would resist, but she was determined to see if even Eris had experienced something beyond logic. "Eris," Lonni began, "have you ever felt the absence of someone you wished were here?" Eris's mind responded immediately. We are dwellers. We don't form attachments like humans. But think carefully. Has there ever been a time when someone's absence affected you in a way you couldn't explain? Eris hesitated, his eyes narrowing. There was one time. A colleague, a pilot, was reassigned. We flew together for many cycles. When they left, I felt something. It wasn't longing, but there was a sense of loss. I couldn't explain it. It was simply there. Lonnie's curiosity deepened. And have you ever encountered something that couldn't be explained by data or logic? Eris was silent for a long moment. Once, during a flight through an asteroid field, I made a maneuver that should have been impossible. The calculations didn't align, yet I succeeded. I've never been able to explain it. It was as if something beyond data guided me. Lonni sat back, her mind filled with new possibilities. The Dwellers, for all their logic and efficiency, weren't so different from humans after all. As Lonni concluded her analysis, she realized that traces of the human condition existed even within the Dwellers. Subtle, perhaps, but undeniable. For all their insistence on logic and data, the Dwellers were not immune to the mysteries of existence, feelings of absence, inexplicable moments, and experiences beyond their understanding. Lonni understood now that, like humans, the Dwellers carried traces of something deeper, something that transcended data, something that could not be fully measured or explained. And for the first time in her existence, Lonni felt a strange sense of connection to both the humans she studied and the crew she had known for so long. The universe, it seemed, was more complex and intertwined than she had ever imagined. As she sat in the quiet of the Watcher, Lonni contemplated the answers she had gathered. The crew's subtle admissions, though carefully concealed behind their logical minds, revealed something profound: that even the Dwellers, with all their efficiency and reason, were not entirely immune to the mysteries that governed human behavior. They, too, had moments of unexplained clarity, feelings of absence, and experiences that defied logic. Lonni knew that the study of Earth and its inhabitants was far from over, but now she was left wondering if her own people had more in common with humans than they had ever thought possible. This analysis, only the beginning. Chapter 7. Anomalies. The silence aboard the Watcher was comforting to Lonni, a constant hum of energy that served as the backdrop to her observations. Earth turned slowly below, a vibrant swirl of color and life, but Lonnie's mind was elsewhere, focused not on the planet itself, but on two individuals who had become her most fascinating subjects. For weeks, Lonni had watched Stacy Sims and John Colt, their lives intertwining in ways that defied probability. What had started as mere curiosity had now evolved into something deeper, something more perplexing. Both Stacy and John, in their own ways, had begun to obsess over their brief encounters, unable to push the other from their thoughts. It was a subtle shift at first, a flicker of recognition when their minds wandered. But now, Lonni could see it clearly. They were thinking about each other more frequently, with increasing intensity. Lonni monitored their behavior with detached interest. John would pause during his work, his mind drifting back to the woman on the train, the fleeting glance they had shared. He didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her, yet he couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind. It was irrational, he told himself, a distraction from the order and logic that governed his life. But the more he tried to resist, the more the thought of her crept in, softly at first, then more insistently. Stacy, too, found herself thinking about the man she had briefly encountered twice. In the quiet of her studio, as her brush moved across the canvas, her mind would wander back to him. It was absurd, she thought. A romantic notion fit only for a fiction story, a fantasy. And yet, despite her best efforts to dismiss it, the memory of him lingered, a whisper in the back of her mind that refused to fade. Lonni observed their internal struggles with growing fascination. She could see the vulnerability in both of them, the way they tried to rationalize their feelings, to tell themselves that love like this simply didn't exist. It was a concept reserved for fictional worlds, for stories crafted to entertain or inspire hope. But in reality, love wasn't supposed to happen like this. It wasn't supposed to be born from fleeting moments or impossible coincidences. They resist, Lonni thought, her telepathic voice a quiet hum in the stillness of the ship. They resist the idea of something beyond their understanding. Lonni leaned closer to the glowing interface before her, her eyes scanning the data that detailed every nuance of Stacy and John's behavior. The flickers of hope they felt, the brief moments where they allowed themselves to believe in something more, were always followed by a retreat into logic, into disbelief. Stacy would shake her head, dismissing the idea of love as an illusion. John would turn back to his work, burying his thoughts in data, convincing himself that emotions like these were nothing more than a distraction. Yet, for all their resistance, Lonni could see the truth. They both wanted to believe. They both longed for something more, even if they couldn't admit it to themselves. They call it fiction, Lonni mused to herself, a creation of their minds. But why do they create it? The concept of fiction was foreign to the Dwellers. In their world, everything was based on data, on logic, on the pursuit of knowledge. They didn't invent stories or create worlds that didn't exist. Yet here, on Earth, humans spent vast amounts of time and energy crafting entire universes out of nothing, places where anything was possible, where love could transcend logic, where miracles could happen. Fiction, Lonni realized, was more than entertainment. It was a reflection of hope, of belief in something beyond what was real. And then there was faith. Faith. The word lingered in Lonnie's mind, a concept she had observed among humans but had never fully understood. Faith was the belief in something that couldn't be proven, the conviction that something existed even without evidence. It was, in many ways, the opposite of everything the Dwellers stood for. Yet, as Lonni watched Stacy and John struggle with their feelings, she began to see the power of faith. They didn't believe in love, not in the way their fiction stories described it, but they wanted to. And that desire, that longing, was a form of faith. Why do they believe in something that doesn't exist? Lonni wondered, her mind turning over the question. Why do they have faith in something beyond their capability? As she pondered this, another thought began to form in her mind, a thought that was both unsettling and intriguing. The Dwellers prided themselves on their technology, on their ability to create and innovate. But where did those innovations come from? Where did new things originate? Did they not, in some way, require a form of faith? The belief that something could be created before it existed? The trust in someone's ability to bring a new idea to life? Lonnie's thoughts drifted back to the early days of Dweller technology, when breakthroughs in science had seemed impossible. There had been moments, even then, when the data didn't align, when the calculations didn't support the idea. But someone had believed in it anyway. Someone had pushed forward, trusting in their vision before it became a reality. Is that faith? Lonni asked herself, her mind awash with new possibilities. Did we too believe in something before it existed? It was a question that unsettled her, yet it also fascinated her. The idea that faith, a concept so foreign to the Dwellers, might have played a role in their own history was both profound and troubling. Could it be that faith wasn't exclusive to humans? Could it be that, even in the most logical of minds, there existed a sliver of belief in the impossible? As Lonni sat in the stillness of the control room, she felt the weight of the question pressing down on her. For the first time, she began to wonder if there was more to existence than logic and data. Perhaps in the vast expanse of the cosmos, there were forces at play that couldn't be measured or quantified. Perhaps faith, in all its forms, was one of those forces. She turned her gaze back to the data stream, watching as Stacy and John continued their lives, each trying to suppress the thoughts that plagued them. But Lonni knew the truth now. No matter how much they resisted, no matter how much they tried to convince themselves otherwise, they both wanted to believe. And that desire, to believe in something beyond themselves, was the most powerful anomaly of all. Lonni leaned back in her seat, her mind alive with new questions. The study was far from over, and the more she learned about the human condition, the more she began to question her own existence. For if humans, with all their contradictions and inefficiencies, could create worlds out of nothing and believe in things that didn't exist, then perhaps the Dwellers, too, had more to discover about themselves. And as the Watcher drifted silently through the stars, Lonni knew that the answers she sought were waiting, both in the humans she observed and in the quiet, uncharted corners of her own mind. Chapter 8. Dweller. Deep Dive. Lonni sat quietly in the chamber, the soft glow of the crystalline walls reflecting off her sleek form. Her mind buzzed with questions, her curiosity growing with each passing day. The concept of faith had taken root in her thoughts, sparked by the anomalies of John and Stacy. Their persistent thoughts of one another, despite their logical resistance, had opened new pathways in Lonnie's understanding of the human condition. But now, she sought to look inward, to her own crew, to the Dwellers themselves. Was faith something that extended beyond humanity? Did the Dwellers, too, harbor a hidden capacity for belief in something before it existed? The crew gathered once more, seated in the common chamber. Eris, Mira, Voron, and Kala arranged themselves in the customary silence of the Dwellers, their postures straight, their expressions neutral. They had become accustomed to Lonnie's questions. though today's inquiry would take them deeper into unfamiliar territory. "I've been thinking," Lonni began, her telepathic voice calm yet probing, "about belief. Specifically belief in something before it happens. An idea, an invention, or even an outcome. Have any of you experienced that?" Eris was the first to respond. "Belief? We rely on data, Lonni. Everything we've ever achieved is rooted in analysis." "I understand," Lonni replied, her gaze steady. "But think carefully. Before we had the data, before we created our technology, was there ever a moment when you believed in something? Before it existed?" The question lingered, hovering in the air between them. Eris's eyes flickered with thought, his mind processing the query. He resisted at first, as was typical for a dweller, but Lonni could sense a shift. "Perhaps," Eris finally admitted, his posture relaxing slightly. "During the development of our first energy cores, there were moments when the calculations didn't align. The data suggested failure, but I believed it could work. I pushed forward, trusting that the core would stabilize. Eventually, it did. But at the time, I had no proof. Only belief." Lonnie's mind buzzed with interest, but she kept her reaction measured. "So, you believed in an outcome before the data supported it?" "I suppose I did," Eris conceded, his thoughts tinged with mild surprise. "But it was a rare occurrence." Lonni turned to Mira, who had been listening intently. "What about you, Mira? Have you ever believed in something before it came to be?" Mira's eyes narrowed, her mind searching for an answer. "There was a time, during one of my biological studies, when I hypothesized the existence of an unknown species. There was no evidence, only faint traces in the data, but I felt certain it existed. I pursued the study, and eventually, I was proven correct. I believed in the species before we had confirmation. It was an instinct, perhaps, a belief that the data would catch up to the truth." "Instinct, belief," Lonni repeated thoughtfully. "These are not things we normally discuss, yet they seem to have guided you." "It was an anomaly," Mira added, her voice quiet. "But yes, I believed in something before it was real." Lonnie's gaze shifted to Voron, who sat with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. "Voron, you've always been one of the most data-driven among us. Have you ever believed in an idea or invention before the data supported it?" Voron hesitated, his mind flickering with resistance. "I don't deal in belief, Lonni. I deal in facts." "And yet," Lonni pressed gently, "there must have been a moment, a fleeting one perhaps, where you trusted in something before it became a reality. Think back." Voron's gaze hardened as he sifted through his memories. Finally, he spoke. "During the development of our communication systems, there was a point where the data suggested failure. The signals were too weak, the distance too great. But I knew it could work. There was no proof, no evidence. I simply believed it would succeed. And it did." Lonnie's thoughts stirred with excitement, though she kept her voice calm. "So you believed in the system before it existed?" "Yes," Voron admitted, his expression softening. "But it was only a moment. I wouldn't call it faith." Lonni turned her attention to Kala, who had been unusually quiet during the discussion. "Kala, what about you? Have you ever believed in something before it happened?" Kala's eyes flickered with thought, her mind deep in contemplation. "There was an invention I worked on, an adaptive energy system. The initial data suggested it wouldn't work, but I believed it could. I pushed forward, even when the calculations didn't support it. Eventually, the system stabilized, but for a time, it was only belief that drove me." Lonni nodded, absorbing the information. Each of her crew members had experienced belief in some form, an idea, an invention, an outcome. They had trusted in something before it existed, even if they had never recognized it as faith. "Thank you all for your honesty," Lonni said, her voice soft. "I've been studying something in humans that I believe may be related to what we've discussed here. They call it faith. It's the belief in something that cannot be seen or proven. It drives them in ways we've only just begun to understand. A ripple of curiosity passed through the group. Faith? Eris asked, his voice laced with skepticism. That sounds illogical. It is, Lonni agreed. But it's also powerful. Humans believe in things they can't measure. They have faith in people, in outcomes, in possibilities. And I've noticed something fascinating. Faith may be linked to the anomaly I observed in John Colt and Stacy Sims. The group shifted slightly, their attention fully focused on Lonni now. John and Stacy met twice, in improbable circumstances, Lonni explained. Their encounters defied the probabilities I calculated, 1 in 1.6 billion. Yet despite the odds, they continue to think about each other, even though they don't know each other's names. They've become obsessed with the idea of one another, but they resist, believing that love like this only exists in fiction. They have faith in their resistance, and yet they can't stop hoping. Kala's eyes widened slightly. You're suggesting that their thoughts, their emotions, are connected to fate? Perhaps, Lonni mused. Or perhaps faith and fate are intertwined. They both defy logic, but they are undeniably real in the human experience. The room fell into a thoughtful silence. Lonni could sense the crew grappling with the implications of her findings. Faith, an idea so foreign to the Dwellers, had guided them too in small ways. They had believed in ideas, inventions, and outcomes before they had proof. And now, Lonni had witnessed that same force driving two humans to think about each other, despite the vastness of the world around them. I don't know if we've ever truly understood faith, Lonni continued, her voice soft but firm. But it exists, in humans, in us. It's something that transcends logic, something that binds people, perhaps even across the stars. Eris leaned forward slightly, his mind filled with questions. What do you propose we do with this knowledge? Lonnie's gaze swept across the room, her thoughts buzzing with possibilities. For now, we continue to observe. There is much we don't yet understand. But this anomaly of faith may be the key to understanding the human condition, and perhaps to understanding ourselves. The crew sat in contemplative silence, each of them considering Lonnie's words. For the first time in their long journey, they had glimpsed something beyond data and logic, something intangible, yet undeniably real. As the Watcher drifted silently through space, Lonnie's thoughts turned once more to John and Stacy. They didn't know each other's names, and they might never meet again. But they couldn't stop thinking about each other. And in that quiet, persistent hope, Lonni saw the essence of faith. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to the universe than even the Dwellers had ever imagined. Chapter 9. Before the Journey. Kosma drifted silently through the void of space, a rogue planet unmoored from the gravitational pull of any star. From the outside, it was a cold, barren world, its rocky surface scarred by ancient impacts, the airless void above it stretching into the eternal darkness. The planet was devoid of life on the surface, with jagged mountains and frozen plains stretching endlessly under the dim starlight that barely reached this far into the solar system. To any observer, Kosma would appear dead, another lifeless rock wandering the cosmos. But deep beneath its surface, Kosma was alive. Within its core lay a vast, meticulously engineered metropolis, a shining example of the Dwellers' technological mastery. The Dwellers had hollowed out the heart of the planet millennia ago, creating a self-sustaining world beneath the crust. Cities of crystalline towers and metallic structures stretched across vast caverns, illuminated by the soft glow of the energy core that powered everything. This core, a marvel of advanced engineering, radiated a steady, warm light that provided the Dwellers with all they needed: energy, warmth, and life itself. The air was clean and sterile, carefully regulated to ensure the perfect environment for their existence. Kosma's inner world was a place of order and precision. The Dwellers had no need for nature or art. Their lives were governed by logic, efficiency, and progress. The cities were quiet, devoid of the noise and chaos that characterized human settlements. Every structure, every pathway, every detail was designed with purpose. The metallic surfaces shimmered faintly under the ambient light, and the crystalline towers reflected the pale glow of the energy core, casting long shadows across the polished streets. In one of these vast cities, Lonni stood at her station, reviewing the final details of the mission ahead. Her slender humanoid form, like liquid metal, gleamed faintly in the soft light. Her eyes, large and reflective, scanned the streams of data projected before her. The Earth study had been in preparation for cycles, and now, the time had come to execute it. It was a mission that intrigued her, but she, like the others, did not expect it to be particularly remarkable. Earth, she mused to herself, her telepathic voice resonating in the quiet chamber. A planet filled with biological life forms, primitive in their technologies, governed by emotions and inefficiencies. Eris, the pilot of the Watcher, entered the room, his posture relaxed but his mind focused. His reflective skin shimmered faintly as he approached Lonni, his eyes fixed on the data. "Preparations are nearly complete," he projected, his voice calm and efficient. "The Watcher is ready for departure. We'll begin the journey soon." Lonni nodded, her thoughts aligning with Eris's. "Are you expecting anything unusual?" she asked, though the question was more rhetorical than curious. "No," Eris replied, a faint ripple of humor in his tone. "I suspect it will be an interesting mission, but nothing beyond what we've seen in other systems. Primitive societies tend to follow predictable patterns." "Indeed," Lonni agreed. "Earth has shown some technological development, but their emotional tendencies will likely hinder any true progress." Mira entered next, her telepathic voice brimming with clinical curiosity. "I'm looking forward to studying their biological systems. They rely heavily on organic matter for sustenance and energy, which is inefficient. It will be intriguing to see how they manage such a fragile existence." "You think they'll surprise us?" Eris asked, his voice tinged with amusement. Mira shook her head slightly, her expression neutral. "Unlikely. Organic life forms are generally predictable in their vulnerabilities. Their reliance on food, air, and rest will make them fascinating to study, but I doubt we'll encounter anything revolutionary." As the crew gathered, Varan joined them, his mind already sifting through the technical data he had been reviewing. "I'm interested in their infrastructure," he projected, his voice precise. "It's rudimentary compared to our systems, but there's potential for understanding their development processes. They've achieved much with limited resources, though their reliance on fossil fuels is baffling." Kala was the last to arrive, her telepathic voice carrying a lighter tone. "Perhaps we'll find something amusing at least. Their broadcasts have been entertaining. Their attempts to depict technological advancements are far removed from reality." A ripple of shared amusement passed through the group. The Dwellers had intercepted Earth's radio and television transmissions for decades, and their early analysis had caused confusion. Science fiction shows had been mistaken for reality at first, until the Dwellers had learned to differentiate between fiction and fact. "I suppose we'll learn something," Lonni said, turning her attention back to the data streams. "But let's not expect too much. Our mission is to observe, gather data, and report back." "Underwhelming, perhaps, but necessary," Eris added. "Their planet is one of the few biological systems that has developed sentient life. That alone makes it worthy of study." With that, the crew moved to the departure chamber. The Watcher stood ready, its sleek, undetectable design gleaming under the soft lights of the launch bay. The craft had been designed for long-term observation, its systems engineered to remain invisible to human technology. The Dwellers would be able to study Earth from orbit without ever being detected. As they boarded the ship, Lonni felt a sense of quiet anticipation. Though the mission was expected to be routine, there was always a chance that something unexpected could arise. She activated the craft's systems, her telepathic commands syncing with the ship's interface. "All systems are operational," Eris confirmed from the pilot's seat. "We're ready to begin." The Watcher hummed to life, its engines powering up with a quiet efficiency that belied the power within. As the craft lifted off the surface of Kosma, the crew watched their home planet grow smaller on the viewscreen, the dark, lifeless surface fading into the distance. Inside the ship, the Dwellers settled into their roles, each focused on the tasks ahead. Lonni felt a calm sense of purpose as they left Kosma behind. The study of Earth would be another step in their quest for knowledge, another piece of data in the vast mosaic of the universe. This will be an interesting study, Lonni projected to the crew. But let's remain realistic. Of course, Voron replied. We'll observe, collect data, and return with our findings. Nothing more. As the Watcher glided silently into the depths of space, Lonni couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to this mission than they had anticipated. But she quickly dismissed the thought. Earth was a biological curiosity, nothing more. Their lives were governed by logic and data, and that was all they needed to complete the mission. The journey had begun, and for now, that was enough. Chapter 10. Impossible. The Watcher floated silently above the Earth, its sleek form blending into the backdrop of stars. Inside, Lonni sat at her observation station, her mind immersed in the lives of Stacy Sims and John Colt. For weeks now, she had studied their thoughts, their actions, their emotions, and the inexplicable pull that seemed to bind them together. She had cataloged every nuance, every fleeting moment, and yet, nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to witness. On this day, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, an unspoken anticipation that both Stacy and John seemed to feel. Lonni could sense it in their thoughts. Whispers of curiosity, fragments of desire, the faintest notion that they were on the verge of something. It was subtle at first, a stray thought here, a passing feeling there. But as the hours passed, that pull grew stronger, until neither Stacy nor John could resist it any longer. Stacy stood at the window of her studio, her brush hanging loosely in her hand as she stared out at the city. The vibrant colors on her canvas lay forgotten, the swirling hues of a Missouri sunset frozen in time. Her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about him, the man from the train, the stranger who had returned her phone with nothing more than a fleeting glance and a shared moment of disbelief. Who was he? Why couldn't she shake the feeling that she needed to find him? At the same time, across the city, John sat at his desk, his hands resting motionless on the keyboard. The lines of data on the screen blurred before his eyes as his mind wandered back to the woman from the trolley, the one who had tossed his keys through the window. He didn't know her name, didn't know anything about her, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. It didn't make sense. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life. Love like this only existed in fiction. And yet, there it was. The thought that gnawed at the edges of his mind, the undeniable pull that urged him to find her. Lonni watched as both Stacy and John gave in to that pull, each of them leaving their respective spaces and venturing out into the city. It was as if they were being drawn by an invisible force, their movements synchronized in a way that defied explanation. Stacy left her studio, her coat wrapped tightly around her as the cool evening air brushed against her skin. She made her way to the Central West End Metrolink station, her steps quick, purposeful, though she wasn't entirely sure why. John, too, felt that same pull, leaving his office behind and heading toward the Delmar Loop trolley. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the strange compulsion that had overtaken him. He had work to do, reports to finish, yet none of it mattered now. He had to go. As Lonni observed, her mind hummed with calculations. The odds of this happening, two people, in separate parts of the city, both driven by the same inexplicable urge to return to the places where they had first encountered each other, were astronomical. 1 in 1.6 billion, perhaps. But what she was witnessing now went beyond mere improbability. It was impossible. Stacy arrived at the Metrolink platform, her breath visible in the crisp evening air. The station was quieter than usual, the fading light casting long shadows across the concrete. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the empty platform. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she had to be here. Slowly, she made her way to the exact spot where she had dropped her phone weeks ago. Her heart raced as she stared down at the ground, the memory of that moment flooding back. At the same time, John stepped onto the Delmar Loop trolley platform, his eyes drawn immediately to the spot where he had dropped his keys. The trolley clanged in the distance, its familiar sound echoing through the street, but John paid it no mind. His focus was entirely on that small patch of ground, the place where their worlds had briefly collided. Lonnie's senses sharpened as she watched, her gaze flickering between the two. The synchronicity was undeniable. Stacy and John, miles apart, both standing at the spots where they had lost something. Both staring down at the ground, lost in thought. And then, in perfect harmony, they moved. At the exact same moment, Stacy and John reached down, their hands brushing the cold concrete as they touched the very spot where their items had fallen. The motion was slow, deliberate, as if they were both reliving the moment in their minds. And in that instant, as their fingers made contact with the ground, something shifted in the air, a ripple of energy, a connection that Lonni could feel even from the safety of her orbit. At the exact same time, Stacy and John whispered a single word. You. The word escaped their lips like a breath, soft, almost inaudible, but charged with meaning. It was a word filled with recognition, with longing, with something neither of them fully understood. Lonnie's mind reeled as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. The probability of this happening, of two individuals, separated by miles, acting in perfect synchronicity, thinking the same thoughts, whispering the same word, was beyond calculation. It defied every rule, every law of logic and probability that the Dwellers had ever known. Impossible, Lonni thought, her telepathic voice trembling with disbelief. This cannot be real. Yet it was. The data was undeniable. Lonni replayed the moment in her mind, over and over, searching for an explanation. But there was none. Nothing in her vast knowledge of the universe, of probability, of human behavior, could explain what had just occurred. For the first time in her existence, Lonni felt something unfamiliar, something beyond logic and data. It was a sense of awe, of wonder, of being in the presence of something greater than herself. This was not mere coincidence. This was something else, something far more profound. Is this fate? Lonni wondered, her mind racing with questions. Is this what humans call destiny? She didn't know. For all her knowledge, for all her understanding of the cosmos, Lonni had no answers. All she had was the data, and the undeniable truth that she had witnessed the impossible. As the Watcher drifted silently above the earth, Lonni remained at her station, her thoughts tangled in a web of disbelief and fascination. Stacy and John had returned to their lives, unaware of the impossible moment they had just shared. But Lonni knew, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. The universe, it seemed, was full of surprises, and for the first time, Lonni began to wonder if there were forces at play that even the Dwellers could not understand.